Okay, so today we'll talk about two architects born on the 27th of December. Well, on this information from Wikipedia for Pieter De Swart, it doesn't say he was born on the 27th, but other sources claim that that's what it was. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. We'll talk about him. So was a Dutch architect from the 18th century. In Paris, Pieter De Swart received training from a master builder Jacques-François Blondel between 1745 and 1746 on the recommendation and expense of William IV. When he returned to the Netherlands, the elderly Daniel Marot was still William III's court architect. They worked together a lot. So that's an explanation about him becoming the court architect in the Netherlands. His style, I translated this, and you must forgive me for the translation. It was done by Google Translate from Dutch. I couldn't find a website in English about him. Please be kind and turn off the microphone. Okay, in Paris, at the architecture school of Blondel, De Swart learned to work in the style of Louis XIV. He continued this when he returned to the Netherlands and worked a lot with Marot. When he died in 1752, he continued to develop, that is, when Marot died, not him, he continued to develop in the style of Louis XV, and his work became even more refined. So let's see some drawings by this Dutch architect, influenced by the so-called style of Louis XIV. And his training in Paris with Blondel, as we read. Now, we are going to go through some of his works, some built works. This is not going to be a large presentation, but we'll still pay homage to him. Now, from 1742, so the 18th century, unfortunately, I had no time to translate from the Dutch into English, so we have to take these names of these projects as they are in Dutch. It's a house. What exactly its function is, besides being a house, well, it was said in the Dutch language. Anyway, 18th century. Is this related to Louis XIV? I'm not sure about it, but I actually like this more in a way than the pompous, Louis Le Soleil style. This is more simple and in a way more down to earth, and I like this. Now, a building from 1750, but I had no pictures. From 1754, it wasn't so easy always to find pictures. He did the entrance into this building. What exactly is happening there, I don't know. I think he built mostly in The Hague, the capital of the Netherlands. So he was an 18th century Dutch architect. Now, a building where now is the NU means in Dutch, this I learned, means now Museum Bredius from 1755. This is, there are actually three buildings, one next to the other. I guess it's an important museum, rather large. And all these three buildings were built by him. You see them better here. And I like these windows with shutters, with oblongs. I think oblongs are important, and they could function quite well in the present as well. I mean, are really the brissolets that Le Corbusier was so fond of really a progress vis-a-vis the oblongs? I'm not so sure, because with the oblongs, you can manipulate the position of the oblongs depending on the conditions of light and noise. And I think you have much more freedom than with, rigidly, configured concrete brissolets. And this one also gives a certain, movement on the facade. Plus, you warm up the facade because most of these oblongs are made of wood. I like this building, or these buildings, by this Dutch architect from the 18th century. Now, a church from 1759, a rather interesting church. I mean, its elevation is, intriguing, with these large windows and, with its almost square main elevation. There is almost a certain modernity here because of the simplicity of the volume and the space. Maybe a little bit severe, but warmed up a little by certain details. Otherwise, it's a rather, yes, modernistic, almost modernistic facade. And if you make abstraction of the benches, you could almost say, and of course the organs and so on, the organ and chandeliers, well, this is almost like a meeting room. It has this civic, secular quality. You wouldn't necessarily associate it with, with being a church. This is an engraving with this church. The proportions are a little bit different. I guess the engraver was not very, very skilled or careful, but I thought it would be nice to take a look at this graphic work representing this church as well. So 18th century. Now, a palace, 1760. Well, a palace which is part of the, of the urban tissue. I think all these buildings are actually in The Hague. And I have to say it with a little bit of pride. The vice mayor of Hague was once present here on Zoom, and a very nice man. He sent me afterwards a large material about Constant, the Dutch artist, and he used to be also the president of the architecture club, or I don't know exactly the name of the organization. A very interesting man. Yes, he was attracted by, I don't know how he got the announcement, but he was here on Zoom for almost 2 hours. So this building is with us for now more than more than 250 years. Okay, another building from 1761. I like the architecture of this architect. It's it has elements of, but you know, isolated islands of Baroque intervention. Otherwise, the building, is not a nuisance to the, to the facades of this street. After all, between this building and what he designed is not such a long distance, actually, because of the large windows. I love the Dutch culture for the bike. It's democratic, it's sustainable, it's a very healthy way of moving, and I think it should be used. I always say the bike is the future, and I believe it is true. Yes, you cannot go too far away with it, but it's important to, the bicycle is not polluting the air. It doesn't need a parking lot really, and it's healthy. I think the trees love bicycles too. Now another building from 1766. This one is a theater, and you're going to see some pictures from the inside as well. Interesting, the plan, the actual, space allocated to the theater itself is not so big compared to, all the other spaces around it. This is kind of interesting, although this space is not small if you look at this. '18th century architecture. Now, this is a building he built for the military in 1768. You wonder what this, sculpture or statue is doing here, in a, considering the function of the building. And now it's a museum there, but initially it was not. In a way similar to the previous buildings that we saw by him. Now it's this museum. And, lithograph. I don't know if from the 18th century, but I thought it would be amusing to, to look at it for a second. The kid is contemplating the architecture of this architect as well. Now, I end this rather short presentation about him with this last work, Frederic Chopin in Den Haag, in The Hague, from 1770. And I only have one or two pictures with it. It's again, you know, it was dedicated to the military, and here they are emerging on horses from the building. And again, you know, some kids looking with curiosity. I like the presence of these children, you know, curious as they are. I wish there was more curiosity towards this presentation, these presentations also. And now we'll go to the second architect today, connected with today, a Swiss architect, with an Italian name, because Switzerland has a so-called Italian part. Giovanni Antonio Viscardi, 1645-1713. So he was, you know, born before the previous architect we looked at. Giovanni Antonio Viscardi, actually quite an accomplished and good architect. Let's read a little bit about him. Giovanni Antonio Viscardi. Giovanni Antonio Viscardi, born on the 27th of December, 1645, and died in 1713. So he died at 68, was a Swiss architect of the Baroque who worked mostly in Bavaria. Giovanni Antonio Viscardi was born in San Vittore, Grisons. He was descended from a family which provided several architects who had worked in Bavaria, Styria, and Mainz. He started his career as a superintendent to Enrico Zuccalli before 1675. In 1678, he was appointed master mason, and in 1685, chief architect. Dismissed in 1689, Viscardi worked as an independent architect until he became Zuccalli's successor as chief architect of the Bavarian court in 1706 with the Austrian occupation of Bavaria. He died aged 67 in Munich while still in office. I only found two pictures with him, this little one and the one not much bigger, this one. He looks more like a musician than an architect, but anyway, let's trust that this is how he looked like. And let's see some works. Maria Kirche at Frdricus Abbey from 1700, 1702, 1708. The statue is not by him, it's just the building. These architects are actually interesting. You know, these are architects, you know, unless you are an expert or a specialist, most people don't talk about. But I think there are interesting creative forces in the history of architecture that deserve to be talked about and known. I mean, this church is not a bad church. I don't know, I mean, bad architecturally speaking. I don't know about this rather burlesque meeting between this window and this entrance door. What is above that, it's rather convincing and skillfully done. And the interior is impressive, actually. Baroque indeed. And here I compared the plans of three different churches, one by Maderno, this one, and then Saint Agnese in Piazza Navona in Rome by Borromini and Carlo Rainaldi. And then this one is by this architect, Antonio Viscardi. I like comparative architecture where you can compare, you know, works or images of works or plans and so on. because you can situate a work, better. After all, between this one and this one, about 100, 120 years passed, not so much. But I think, this page that I found and I chose to display it is concerned mainly with the presence of the octagon. And I mean, here in all these three plans, the central space is octagonal. And the octagon is almost it's not a mysterious. It's a geometrical figure which deserves some attention. Apparently, Leonardo da Vinci used the octagon a lot in his sketches. He didn't build, but he envisioned architectures. And there are impressive architectures, which employ the octagon. The octagon can be precisely drawn by having a square and then rotate the same square, meaning with the same length of the side at 45 degrees, and then you unite the corners and you obtain the octagon. I made a presentation actually about the octagon in architecture, and which deserves to be developed. Okay. So this is the church that we just saw. It looks with different proportions in this representation, but I like these representations where, handwritten text accompanies the images, and even some, this is supposed to be the beneficiary of the church. What is her name? Maria Hill. I forgot exactly. Maria Hill. I should learn more about her. Anyway, but the idea let's imagine today you make a project where you also draw a plan of not a plan, a portrait or some representation of the beneficiary, the client. Now in this case, it's not the client per se, but it's dedicated to this religious figure. I guess it's the mother of Jesus. No, it seems to be. Anyway, it's really about a narrative architecture. Can we do a narrative architecture today? I think we could. Yes. And we could relate our buildings in a narrative way to specific clients. Let's say the client of a house you are building is, an electrical engineer. Well, how do you build a house for an electrical engineer? Should the house be identical with a house you would build for an actor or a mill worker? No, because he will be for a while at least an electrical engineer. How do you express this? You could make the building burst with electrical energy. Maybe you could, I don't know, make the room of outlets, or you could, I don't know, you could, with a speculative form of thinking, you could narrate the story of the client. Anyway, the new church of St. Mary of Fürstenfeld Abbey, but this one, yeah, there are two churches. I guess he built only this one, but which is interesting actually. Not a typical church if we are to refer to Italian churches or French churches. It's interesting, I can't explain very well. I don't have enough knowledge of an expert why I find it interesting, but it's rather unique. Now another abbey, this one more austere. In a beautiful landscape though. An expansion of another abbey, the Benedict Burn Abbey. This one also almost a little bit severe. So we remember these were built in Bavaria, in Germany. And if you look at the interior and you look at the exterior, there is a great difference between the interior and the exterior. The interior is almost Rococo. Okay, building in Munich from 1709, 1710. This one also, again, looking at the outside and looking at the inside, you could have a surprise. The interior is almost excessively sweet, but it depends on the perception of the viewer. Maybe the house of God was meant to be like this, like a surprise. Once you enter, you are removed from the commonness of the street and or other buildings, and you are all of a sudden in a special environment like here, being the house of God, being a church. There is a level of otherness outside too, but not you know, alarmingly, so to speak. I mean, the building is not, you know, ostentatious in asserting its otherness. And this is the basement. Another church, the Trinity Church, also in Munich. So an Italian architect from Switzerland building in Germany. quite sculptural, the entrance into the building. And it's a narrow building, but still it has some drama, at least in this picture. A palace, Palais Riviera. Here I'm a little bit confused because I searched for Palais pricing in München, and I got this image from Wikipedia, but this is very different from. It might be that is the wrong information, but on Wikipedia, on this architect, this building is shown with this name, Palais Riviera Pricing. The reason I'm confused is because I discovered there is also a street, a small street, an alley with his name in München. It's this one, Viscardi Gasse. Viscardi is his name. Viscardi Gasse in the Münchner Innenstadt is this street here, which bears the name of this architect. And this is actually the palace, but he didn't build it, the palace. I don't know why the name of the street was given to him, although this building was not designed by him. It was built after his, or maybe he did some plans, but it was built after after he died. I understood that during Hitler's power, when he was in power, there was something about this street. I think some Nazis or where something happened to them on this street, and Hitler ordered every passerby to, I don't know, make some kind of a gesture as an homage to those who. This information can be found on Wikipedia, I think, or I don't know exactly where I read it. Starting from Wikipedia, of course, because all information today starts from Wikipedia. Although sometimes I wonder if it's always very reliable. Anyway, this little alley bears the name of Viscardi, and there is some story. It's actually an important palace, but he didn't build it. It was built after he died. So this is the alley having his name. You know, when buildings connect to the history of a place, the history of a city or a town or a village, when they have a story to tell, they become, I think, more interesting. You know, if something happened in front of a building or on a certain street, all of a sudden architecture moves, I think, to a different plane of existence. Architecture beyond architecture. Thank you.